Bond case, well, Michael McCarthy case. I wanted to talk to our guest, Sarah, about, because she's a former prosecutor, and so many of us have questions about Rochelle Bond and why she was given this deal and why she was given such a sweet deal. So Sarah, tell us a little bit about the thought process that a prosecutor goes through and whether or not you struggle with that as much as we have.
Oh, absolutely, Heather. Unfortunately, in this case, it was a necessary evil to flip Rochelle against Michael. The reason being, and I hate to be morbid, but the condition of the body when
Right.
it was found, it had been in the water. There was, of course, evidence of abuse, but no real way to tell who did what. It really would have been a he said, she said, and a 50-50 is not beyond a reasonable doubt. They had to flip Rochelle, and they must have known or instinctively felt that she was not the one that actually committed the act.
Mm-hmm.
She's more involved, though, than accessory after the fact. She did not just dispose of the body.
Right.
She refused to call the police. She never reported the abuse before, and they went on a bender for several days after poor Bella was killed.
Right.
So she is not just accessory after the fact. The sentence is way too light for what she actually did. But the question is, what can you prove beyond a reasonable doubt? And you have to focus on the really bad guy in Michael, and unfortunately, be more lenient on Rochelle than you otherwise would be.
So she got a very sweet deal, it's fair to say.
Yes. Yes, she did.
Tell me a little bit about this deal. So, and everyone keeps asking questions about it, because my understanding is this: as long as she testifies truthfully, the deal, and then there's a verdict, the deal goes through. If there's a mistrial, a hung jury, then apparently I would assume that the deal would have to go through to the next trial. But who determines whether she testifies truthfully? I mean, I think many of us would say, given the cross-examination, which has been very strong, that she hasn't testified truthfully. So how does a prosecutor say, you have or have not, and then what happens next if they decide she hasn't?
Well, candidly, the practical answer to that is
Right.
you need her to cooperate.
Right.
So even when you're catching her in these lies, even when you know her story doesn't make sense, you're never going to make the conviction stick against Michael unless she cooperates. Again, it's back to what you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt versus what we know in our gut.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. I do want to get to the fact that there's no evidence, physical evidence, tying either one of them to this crime. And I think, because I think that really supports what you just said about this deal. So, the fact, I read an article in the Boston Globe this morning about the fact that baby Bella was found in the ocean really tied the prosecutor's hands, because now all the evidence is gone. Is that your experience?
That's absolutely right. It happens in freshwater as well, but particularly in ocean and saltwater, the body's condition really deteriorates rapidly. It's hard to place cause of death, time of death, and certainly can't preserve any genetic evidence related to the crime. So this really came down to Rochelle made a lot of admissions. She really opened up once they came under heat, and she knew early on that she needed to flip against him in order to save her own skin. So there's no more frustrating sentence than probation. That feels like a slap on the wrist.
Right.
But unfortunately, you don't get Michael without it.
Tell me about what you thought about Jonathan Shapiro's cross-examination of her. It was long. I mean, she was on the stand. This case in many ways reminds me of the Aaron Hernandez case, because you have one witness that the entire case relies upon, and that witness is somebody who's got a lot of their own problems. And we saw what that resulted in the Aaron Hernandez case. But her cross-examination may have been even longer than Alexander Bradley's. How do you think Shapiro did? Do you think he went overboard? Sometimes I felt like, oh my goodness, you're beating a dead horse. But do you think that that's necessary here?
I do, and I had the same thing. I'm falling asleep, but we're asking the same question 10 times in 10 different ways. But it's actually an effective defense strategy, because the more you can pile on, what you're saying against her, anything that could maybe be twisted into a doubt
Right.
and then twisted into a reasonable doubt,
Right.
it actually ends up being an effective defense strategy. There's a part of the jury's mind that thinks, well, if he came after her over and over again, if he had all of this ability to kind of throw her off her game, maybe she's really the bad actor. I don't think it's going to be successful here, but it's a common and frankly good defense tactic.
Yeah, and many of us hope you're right. There's a lot of people on the chat room talking about justice for Bella and how terrible it would be if this crime goes unpunished. So I hope that you're right. I do fear, reasonable doubt is such a sort of fluffy concept, really. We talk about it, we see these TV shows, and yet so many of the cases that we've covered since we've started here at Law News have been hung juries. And so, to overcome reasonable doubt is a difficult endeavor. It sounds like you think that will happen here, though. Do you feel as though there will be a conviction?
I do. The burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not to the exclusion of every possible doubt, beyond a shadow of a doubt. It's a reasonable doubt. And we know what happened here. Unfortunately, we don't really know Rochelle's involvement the way we should, but we know what Michael did.
Yeah, I think that Shapiro's, the defense attorney's strategy is a good one to try to say that she did it. But I think that you're right. I think that there's enough evidence to prove that he was involved to some extent. And therefore, since he's the one on trial and not Rochelle, as much as the defense attorney wants to make it seem that way, hopefully that will be enough to push the case over. I think we're going to hear from the medical examiner today. I'm keeping an eye on the courtroom. It seems like, oh, they're live in the courtroom. All right, Sarah, we're going to take you to the courtroom. We'll be back during the first break. And we will take you to Carter as soon as they have a decision. It sounds like it's going to be around 11 o'clock this morning.
Okay, great. Thanks, Heather.